I got a question for you. How many of you would like to reduce butt time in classrooms from lecturing? Anybody? Anybody like to reduce that a little bit? Okay, let me just put a plug in for using software to create online learning to do that. Because the truth is when we sit there and lecture to people, we don't know if they get it or not, right? So that's why I wanted to talk a little bit about this. And I started out, I was going to compare and contrast a bunch of software packages out there that I've used and some that I haven't used. And what I realized is that by the time I got done doing that, most of it would be obsolete because they upgrade every 6 months or so. So I'm going to talk to you about a couple of things that you've already heard about today. First, I'm going to try to dissuade you from using it. You need to talk with your IT department about hosting and delivering. You've heard that time and time again. And the truth is, some of us don't have the pipeline that they do down in Southern California. You know, we have in San Francisco, between our two main departments or groups, we have a pretty decent 10 megabit pipeline. But when we start going out to different places, we have a T1 line, which is 1.5 meg. And when you start looking at bringing SCADA across there and video and audio, it basically stops. So now, that being said, go ahead and do it. And the reason I say that is because when I was at the last company I was with, when we started doing online learning, it took forever. People, what they used to call, we were based out of New Jersey, and they used to call us out here on the west coast, the frontier. So those of us on the frontier had a heck of a time getting to some of this stuff, especially if there was any video related to that. But what it did is it forced them to upgrade their systems. And they found out going across country, they had about 15 T1 lines, each working separately. They combined them together, and all of a sudden it all works great. The cost of software licenses and maintenance can be kind of expensive on the front end, but once you have them, they're yours. Learning to use the software. Somebody talked about learning the software can be hard. I mean, it takes some time. One of the things you might consider is when you're going to go hire that next person, hire somebody that has those skills so you don't have to upskill somebody. Instructional design and development capability. How many people in here think that it's different to create instructor-led and online-led as far as the methodology? How many of you think there's a difference between the two? Okay, I'm going to tell you, up to a point, there is no difference. Up to the point of creating your objectives and finding out what it is you want to teach people, there really isn't any difference. You use the ADDIE model, and we'll go over that in just a second. But once you figure out that you want to take it online, that's where things start to change. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Technical knowledge, we've heard today, find an SME. Don't guess. You definitely got to have that. But you also have to have technical knowledge on how to do the development. Sometimes, if you go out to an external house to have them do this, they're going to do it with a group of people. They're going to have somebody who's going to do the instructional design. They're going to have somebody that's going to do the artwork. They're going to have somebody that does the storyboarding. And yes, you do storyboarding in e-learning if you want to do it correctly. And then they'll have somebody that'll put it together. In-house, we usually have one person that does all of that. Okay. Now, when I talked about it being the same process, ADDIE, you use the same process when you're creating e-learning. But when you start looking at methodology, when you're doing your analysis phase, how are you going to deliver this? That's when you have to take in not only the pipeline that you can deliver it across, but also what are people using to receive content? Are they using the iPad? Are they using desktop, etc.? You have to take all that into account because you have to test to that. All right, and then that can cause you to spend more money on technology. When you go to design it, you actually, when you're creating instructor-led, you're writing it down, you write it on paper, etc. And you're not really too worried about telling the instructor, go walk over here and just turn it into a camera or to, do anything like that. You have to actually do an entire storyboard, very precise storyboard for this. And the reason you want to do that up front is because it will reduce your production time. You will find all of your mistakes on your storyboard when you go into production. And then you go into development. How many of you know how the industry standard for the number of hours it takes to create one hour of instructor-led training? Anybody? 40. For instructor-led training, it takes approximately 40 hours of time. That's industry standard. to create that amount of training. How many hours do you think it takes to create 1 hour of online learning? Anybody want to take a guess? 200. That's standard, okay, for 1 hour of learning. It's expensive. Now, is that forever? No, it's not, because I can tell you when I first started, yeah, it took me 200 hours to do 1 hour of training. But I can, depending on the level of complexity that I want to do, I can probably get that same thing done in about 80 hours now, all right? It just depends on the complexity of what you're doing, etc., and how well you do your storyboarding. Anybody that does video knows that the better you do your storyboarding, the better your production is going to come out. Okay? So make sure you spend a lot of time there. Your implementation, again, that goes back to the network. It goes back to what are people receiving. How many in here have iPhone and iPad? And how many of you that have iPhone and iPad, keep your hands up for a second. How many of you can watch Swift videos on your iPad or your iPhone? Everybody lower your hand. Okay? So that's an issue. All right? If you're going to use something like Captivate, it uses Swift files. Now, just so you understand, because iPad has become so popular, they are creating new software. There is a new server software that allow you to stream your Swift files. The problem is you're now streaming, which gets rid of part of the good part of using Swift files, which is they download before they launch. Evaluation, again, one of the things about evaluation in instructor-led training is you usually load your classroom up with people who are instructional experts, and then you also load it up with people who are content experts. And they give you feedback, and you go through a revision cycle. When you do online learning, it's a little easier. Especially some of the tools right now have online evaluation functionality on it, so you can just send it out to people. I use Captivate a lot. It has a tool in there. I package it. I can send it to my SMEs. They go through and take it and take notes as they're going through it, which is really nice to give you some instant feedback. And finally, analysis. This is like any other training. You have to update it. You absolutely have to keep a handle on it, because just like a training manual, which people tend to use for operations manuals, anybody have that problem? This stuff goes out of date. But the nice thing about doing it through e-learning is that if you do it in a modular fashion, it's very easy to update. And you can incorporate video. So, advantages of using e-learning, software tools are available for every skill level. You can literally go out, pick up some of the software stuff that they have out there now, and within an hour you could be creating e-learning. I mean, it's that user-friendly. The more complex it is, the more versatile you can be with the learning that you're creating. More interactive. Cost of development decreases over time. Yes, it's very expensive up front if you want to buy a good software package. If you need to skill somebody up to do that, it costs money and it costs time. But over time, that cost will decrease, because that person will be producing more and more video, or excuse me, more and more e-learning as they go along. So your cost of ownership goes way down. If it's designed correctly, coursework can be reused. And many of the things that I've done in the past, where they're individual Swift files that are connected together, I have related them from one course to another, so I don't have to redevelop the same thing, but I can use the same content, which is one of the advantages of this. Bandwidth methodology, it lends itself well to blended learning. That's exactly what I was talking about when I asked that first question of how many people would like to reduce butt time in seats. Where are you starting to use it at PUC? We're starting to front load some of our classes, mostly in leadership and development at this point, with e-learning. So people have to take a 1 or 2 hour short e-learning course, or even a half-hour e-learning course. It has a test on the back end. I can go in and take a look at how they did before we get to the class, and it helps me to set my level. And by doing that, I can reduce the amount of time they're actually sitting in the classroom, because I don't have to lecture. And finally, your file sizes can be a heck of a lot smarter than video files, unless, of course, you add video files and audio files. So, in short, if you're willing to build e-learning development capacity within your organization, over the long run, you can reach more people for a heck of a lot less money and with less disruption than you can in most other formats.